As Lord Acton said, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. It's not a good thing for one man or one woman to have that much power.
One of the most frequently asked questions we're getting these days is, when is the decision on prorogation going to be announced? To get that answer, we decided to reach out to the organization that issued the challenge in the first place, the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms.
Let's take a look. So, ladies and gentlemen, we have the president of the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms with us on Northern Perspective. It's a very, very important nonpartisan organization in Canada. They are the watchdog of our Constitution and our constitutional freedoms. Ladies and gentlemen, John Carpe, president of the JCCF, thanks for joining us on Northern Perspective.
It's an honor, Ryan. Thank you.
Okay, let's get into this. So the number one question that we are getting from Canadians via email, via the comments, and we're pretty sure we know the answer to this, because I think if we knew we had the answer, all of Canada would have the answer. Have you heard anything on Chief Justice Crampton's decision on the prorogation challenge?
No, we've not yet received our 12 hours notice or 24 hours notice. The way courts usually operate, in rare occasions, they will give you a date ahead of time and say, we'll be releasing a decision on, whatever, April 15th. But 99.9% of the time, the court will notify the lawyers, give them 12 hours notice or 1 day's notice and say, okay, tomorrow at 10 a.m., we're releasing the decision. So we have not yet had that notification. I would not be surprised to see a decision out in the first week of March. I think the judge is taking the urgency very seriously, but I'm not making any predictions.
Yeah, that's kind of our feel for this as well. And it's also, far enough away from the Ontario election, news story and cycle that it'll get the attention that it deserves. And I'm sure he's hearing the same rumors that we're all hearing, that shortly after a Liberal leadership candidate is selected, most likely the election is going to be called at that point, and that's what we're hearing. So, so the first week of March, I think is a reasonable prediction. But as you said, we will see what happens. So, so for those that may not know, the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedom, as we mentioned earlier, is a very important organization. What is the mission and objectives of the JCCF?
We defend freedom in Canada. In particular, we defend the freedoms of expression, association, conscience, religion, peaceful assembly, travel and mobility, the right to bodily autonomy. And we were the only civil liberties organization in Canada to oppose lockdowns and sue governments and call for an end to lockdowns. But we actually were 15 years old. Long before lockdowns, we were in the trenches fighting for the freedoms of, for example, defending the free speech rights of university students when they were censored for saying something unpopular. And we're a registered charity. We don't ask for government funding. We don't receive government funding. And it's donations from Canadians that make for a team of 10 lawyers all across Canada, from BC to Quebec. And we're involved in dozens of court cases all over the country.
And you're nonpartisan, right? So you don't care if it's a Liberal government, a Conservative government, a progressive Conservative government, depending on the province that is going on. If freedoms are being attacked, the JCCF is standing up to them.
Absolutely. Yeah. Over the last 15 years, when we have sued governments, that has included Liberal, Progressive, Conservative, NDP, and municipal governments as well, that are typically nonpartisan. So yeah, no position on political parties. We just defend constitutional rights when they're violated.
So, in your view, how does this current prorogation case impact the democratic processes and the constitutional rights of Canadians?
Well, when Prime Minister Trudeau prorogued Parliament on January the 6th, he did so for 11 weeks, which is a very long time, and prorogation is a complete shutdown of Parliament. Committees are not operating. Committees cannot call a minister to answer questions. So there's zero accountability for the government for a very long time. And so the question we put before the court, we filed court papers the next day, January the 7th. And the question is, in our view, under the Constitution, the government is accountable to Parliament. Parliament's elected by the people, and Parliament is above the government. Government is held to account by Parliament. And so we object to prorogation being used as a political tool for the benefit of one political party so that one party can have a leadership race. In our view, that's not valid. So the ruling is going to give us some clarity on the powers of the Prime Minister. Does the Prime Minister have unlimited power to prorogue Parliament? That is a question that's going to be answered by the court. And as of right now, there's no Canadian case law on that point.
And hearing the arguments put forward by James Manson and the JCCF lawyers, obviously there was a attempt to tie what is going on in Canada to the UK case of 2019 during the whole Brexit prorogation. And the government's response seemed to be that, well, the UK case or no, the Prime Minister isn't the one with the power to prorogue, so this challenge is in a way even incorrect. And there was also mention brought forward by the JCCF team that there are written constitutional rules and unwritten constitutional rules, and the government was challenging the fact that there's actually no case that has been decided in favor of an unwritten constitutional rule. And one of the, I think, major blows to the government's argument was when the JCCF was able to actually present a case at the rebuttal stage where that actually has occurred. And I found Chief Justice Crampton's reaction very interesting to that. He seemed almost satisfied that that case was brought forward. So, what do you make of how the team argued and the government's response?
Well, so the Justice Center, the lead lawyer was James Manson, but there were three other lawyers as well. These court cases, it's almost unimaginable how much work goes into them. You've got four lawyers that are all working 16-hour days for weeks prior to the hearing, reading up on dozens of different cases and how they might apply. And so a lot of work went into that. And I think our team did a good job in court. Another interesting aspect was after we filed the papers, the federal government said that they didn't think it was urgent, and they would get back to us in a week's time with their official position on urgency. And the judge didn't buy it and said, no, you guys are going to come up with your position right away, and we're going to have an application in 2 days' time on whether this is urgent. And of course, our side, we won that application. The court released a decision on a Saturday afternoon, which is not common, saying this matter was urgent, and put it on an expedited timetable. There is an interesting precedent from the one you alluded to from the United Kingdom, which is not binding on the court, but courts often will refer to and will adopt the reasoning of decisions from other countries, particularly Britain and the United States. A case can be persuasive. And in the United Kingdom, we had a somewhat similar situation where Boris Johnson was deemed by the court to be using prorogation as a political tool to advance political objectives. And that was improper. So prorogation of Parliament is okay for normal reasons, like we've come to a natural end of the legislative session, the government has passed the bills that it wanted to pass, and we're going to take a break, and after prorogation we're going to have a new throne speech, and the government is going to present a new agenda. So prorogation is not a bad thing, but the court in the UK said you're using it for political purposes to prevent Parliament from doing its job. And so we're arguing that we have a similar situation here. And of course, the federal government saying, no, the United Kingdom case doesn't apply at all and should be completely disregarded. So,
well, and that's where I found it interesting when the British Columbia Civil Liberties Association brought up a completely different argument than the JCCF. And I wasn't really sure where they were going with it as they began, but where they landed was they argued that this was a frustration of Parliament because, essentially a violation of parliamentary supremacy because Parliament had ordered the production of the SDTC under unredacted documents, and the prorogation essentially nullified or challenged parliamentary supremacy in that it completely shut that down and abdicated the government's responsibility for actually providing those documents. So I found that to be very interesting, and just in so much the fact that it was a completely different argument that the JCCF was bringing forward, which in my opinion really bolsters the overall argument that this was an unlawful, unconstitutional prorogation.
Yeah, it was fantastic to have had Democracy Watch was a group that intervened, and the BC Civil Liberties Association intervened. In his opening arguments, the Justice Centre's lawyer, James Manson, did make reference to Prime Minister Trudeau's statements on January 6th, where Mr. Trudeau said Parliament has become dysfunctional, and it was pointed out to the court, yeah, there's a reason why it's become dysfunctional, because there's an order from the Speaker to produce documents that, and again, yeah, as the BC Civil Liberties Association, and as you have just explained, right, the sovereignty of Parliament is above the government, and that's very important. It's not government above Parliament, that the government can treat Parliament as if it's, a servant or something. So this is very relevant that you had what the opposition described as the green slush fund and missing funds, and in order to turn over documents by the majority of Parliament, and the government refuses that and then prorogates. So yeah, it's another strong argument in our favor, and even if the court ruling does not impact the timing of the election, because if Mark Carney wins the Liberal leadership race and calls an election, then the court action is not going to make much of a difference on that point. But it's really important to get some limits on the power of the Prime Minister.
And that actually is a great dovetail into the next question, because if that happens, like we expect it's going to, why is this ruling still important, not just for today, but for generations to come?
Well, there is no Canadian law on, what are there limits on the power of the Prime Minister to prorogue Parliament? Is that just absolute and unconditional? He can do it for any reason, every reason, whenever he wants, or are there actually some limits or boundaries that he has to operate within? And that's an open-ended question. We have no Canadian case law on this point, and my hope would be that the court ruling will place appropriate boundaries on that, because it's not healthy for parliamentary democracy or any democracy if you have a leader with that kind of power. Limits, as Lord Acton said, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. It's good for there to be checks and balances where you don't have an over-concentration of power in one person, And that's, again, regardless of which party the prime minister might happen to belong to. It's not a good thing for one man or one woman to have that much power.
Yeah, and listening to the government's argument, they were essentially saying, well, these are political decisions and they're not legal decisions, so therefore we should be able to do whatever we want. That was what I got out of that. But that's a fairly dangerous, I think, approach to take. But I think it was the only approach that the government had in trying to defend this. So, because if you make a political decision but it has legal implications, you can't just say, well, it was a political decision, so we're not accountable for that at all.
Every decision is a political decision at some level. So if that becomes a pretext for courts not being able to review the decisions of elected officials, it's a problem. I mean, the government's correct. Like the timing of when an election is called or when there's prorogation. I mean, all these decisions have a political dimension, political in the sense of hanging on to power and being popular, right? So politics permeates everything. But this is really important in our tradition. You know, blood has been shed over the course of centuries to gradually take power away from the king. 1,000 years ago, the king had absolute power. If he didn't like you, he could order you arrested, jailed, tortured, executed. It was absolute power. And then gradually with Magna Carta in 1215 and many other developments slowly over the course of centuries, we had Parliament elected by the people very gradually taking on more and more and more and more power to the point where Parliament has become sovereign. And this is just so important that Parliament be respected. And so this court ruling, win or lose, it's going to be good for giving us some clarity on the powers of the Prime Minister.
And if the ruling comes down that it is, the Prime Minister was within his right and there is no limit, does the JCCF plan to appeal, or do the clients want to appeal that decision if that comes down?
Appeals are likely, yes. And that might be true for the government as well. Even if there are no immediate practical consequences, right? Let's say an election's called and it, is no longer as relevant as to the outcome of the court ruling. But it's highly likely that the government would appeal if they lost. It's highly likely that our side would appeal if we lost. Yes, highly likely.
And I think Canadians should take heart in that. Not so much heart in that the government appealing would be wasting more tax dollars, but that's a different that's a different discussion altogether. So we're in a wait and see scenario when it comes to the prorogation ruling. So just to reiterate for the viewers what John had said. When the court is going to be ready to issue a decision, they will provide notice. As you said, between 12 hours and 24 hours that a decision is going to be dropped. At that point, that's when it allows everyone to essentially get ready for the decision to be able to review it, parse it out, and then the media will get a hold of it and disseminate that. So that's when we will know, folks. There will be a couple of different, no doubt, press releases by the JCCF as well as probably mainstream media. We will try and keep our ear to the grindstone on that as well and keep people informed. But as of right now, we are still waiting for Chief Justice Crampton to bring that decision. Now, Canadians may not know that there are many other court cases, as you've alluded to earlier. I believe you said there's 12, I think, cases going on. Brought forth by the JCCF.
Oh, dozens across the country. Yeah. And they're all posted on our website, www.jccf.ca. There's dozens of cases in total. Many of those are winding down. They date back to the time of lockdowns and vaccine passports. And at one point, we had over 300 cases all over Canada, but many of those the number's been going down from 300 down to below 100 now, as we are winning acquittals at trial, or there's a plea bargain between the accused person and the Crown, and the matter's resolved. But yeah, still have dozens across the country.
And what do you think, if all of these are important, of course, because otherwise the JCCF wouldn't have taken up the cause, but what would you say is some of the most important cases that are going on right now?
Well, freedom of speech is a high priority for us. It's been said that if you lost every other right and freedom that existed, right? If you lost your freedom of conscience, religion, association, peaceful assembly, bodily autonomy, if you lost your right to be presumed innocent until proven guilty, if you lost all your rights and freedoms, but if you maintained your freedom of expression, you could use it to win back all the rights and freedoms that you've lost. Conversely, if you lose your freedom of expression, you cannot even really defend yourself properly and adequately against assaults on other rights and freedoms. So it really is the foundation of the free society. So we were taking the lead on opposing the Online Harms Act, which is the most aggressive assault against free speech in Canadian history, C-63. Mm-hmm. And just recently, 1 or 2 weeks ago, I was in Ottawa. I delivered the hard copies of 66,649 Canadians had signed our petition against the Online Harms Act. So we printed that out, and I delivered those to the Prime Minister's office. So this is a high priority. If you lose your freedom of speech, I mean, it's becomes very, very dark very quickly for trying to protect yourself against other rights violations.
Yeah, because as soon as the government gets to decide what you are and are not allowed to say, and even more egregious, what you must say, which that has never happened until Bill C-16 in Western democracy. Truth now becomes an opinion, and the opinion of the government. So it doesn't matter what facts you bring to bear. If the government gets to decide what is and what is not truth, then we are right smack in the middle of George Orwell's 1984. And history can be rewritten, the present can be reformed, and there is no difference between the truth and the lie at that point. So other than C-63, what are some of the other, I would say, initiatives or bills that have been brought forward that have alarmed the JCCF on our erosion of free speech?
Well, one of our clients is Dr. Francis Widdowson, who was fired from Mount Royal University in Calgary for having unorthodox opinions contrary to the mainstream on Aboriginal policy, and she was slated to speak at the University of Lethbridge, about 2 hours south of Calgary, and there's the online mob that said, she shouldn't be allowed to. The topic she was speaking on was interesting. It's her topic, nothing to do with her area of research that she's an expert in, Aboriginal policy, but it was the question was how wokeism threatens academic freedom. That was the topic of her speach. And lo and behold, there's this mob demands, falsely calls her a racist and every other name, and she shouldn't be allowed to speak. University president folds like a cheap tent, as most of them do most of the time. I've seen this over and over again. They have no spine. If there's somebody's going to say something controversial or unpopular on campus, they just join the mob that wants to censor. And so she went down anyways to Lethbridge and went into this big lobby or atrium area. And there's just hundreds of screaming and shouting students, and she just waded into the middle and tried to engage in dialogue. Anyway, remarkable lady. So we are suing the University of Lethbridge over failing to honor its own policies and procedures, because all these universities say, "Oh, we support academic freedom. We believe in the search for truth. We believe that we should not be afraid of hearing, radical and offensive ideas, because we're going to reach truth through debate." They all say that on paper, but they don't practice it. We're also suing the University of British Columbia, which banned a talk. Irony here as well. There was a journalist, Andy Ngo, who had been reporting on Antifa violence in Portland, Oregon. He had been assaulted, and the Free Speech Club at UBC was going to have Andy Ngo talk about Antifa violence, and the University of British Columbia canceled the talk because they were afraid that there might be violence. And again, just utterly spineless. So we sue over free speech. We've sent a warning letter to the city of Edmonton over a new bylaw that is going to empower the city manager to authorize or not authorize demonstrations. And the bylaw actually says that the city manager is going to look at your race and gender and sexual orientation, because the law has to be applied differently for equity-seeking groups. It's just completely absurd, completely contrary to centuries of common law tradition of freedom.
Yeah, that's concerning to say, well, the law applies to person A differently than person B because of this or that physical trait, or maybe they were born like this or like that. As a Canadian, that's quite frightening.
Well, and especially, I used to work for the government, and the federal government, and seeing these policies crystallized and pushed down to the different agencies where the cognitive dissonance is just beyond me, where in their argument is, in order to eliminate discrimination, we must practice discrimination.
Well, and the Justice Center is very concerned about that. We see that woke ideology, the equity, diversity, inclusion is just creeping into and infiltrating everything. And on the one hand, when it comes to free expression, I will defend to the death the right of a person to advocate for that doctrine or for that ideology. I believe in free speech. Anybody who wants to advocate for diversity, equity, and inclusion, I'll go to bat for them on a free speech fund. When it comes to implementing and imposing that doctrine, there should not be coercive government power to impose it. If a private business voluntarily adopts its own EDI or DEI, however it's, forget the order sometimes, but if a private business wants to implement that, okay, fine. But when it's governmental institutions like universities and schools and government bodies and agencies. The other thing we're very concerned about is parental rights. A few years back, we defended, it was known as the Easter Bunny case. There was a couple in Hamilton who applied to become foster parents. They went through all the rigorous screening and everything was great. And two vulnerable young girls were placed in their care. Everything was going really well until the social worker asked these foster parents, what are you going to do for Easter? Are you going to tell the kids about the Easter Bunny? And the parents said, no, we'll have an Easter egg hunt, but we don't believe it's appropriate. We feel that it would be lying to tell the kids about the Easter Bunny, so we're not doing that. On that basis, these girls were removed from these foster parents because the foster parents were not going to teach the kids about the Easter Bunny. It was horrifically painful for the foster parents and the girls. So we sued the Hamilton Children's Aid Society, and we were successful in getting a ruling that said that government agencies cannot discriminate against parents on the basis of religious belief. So parental rights are important. We've also been involved in cases where the laws require that parents be kept in the dark about what their own children are being taught at school, what clubs they're involved in, and this whole business of, we're not going to tell the parents if Susan decides to become a boy and starts using a boy's name, et cetera, we're going to keep the parents in the dark. We have a case on the going in Quebec on that issue.
As we move ahead, it's organizations like yours that help challenge these things where people don't even realize that they can, fight back against institutions, against the government, even get advice on whether, this is a potential breach of our Charter of Rights and Freedoms, of our Constitution. So, for a lot of citizens out there that want to help, that want to join in this fight, how can they support or get involved within the JCCF's efforts to uphold our constitutional rights?
Well, people are welcome to come to our website, www.jccf, so Justice Center Constitutional Freedoms, jccf.ca. We have an email newsletter that goes out twice a month that updates on our court cases and other things that we're doing, our studies, papers, reports, and so on. And we of course, we welcome donations in whatever amount. We issue official tax receipts in February, and so encourage people to visit our website, sign up for a newsletter, and if you like the work that we're doing, by all means, please donate.
Okay. Did you want to get into the book at all, John?
Sure. Yeah, there's just in January, Corrupted by Fear is a book that reviews recent court decisions on lockdowns. I frequently, about once a month, I'm away from Calgary, and we have public meetings in, Toronto, Vancouver, Ottawa, Montreal, whatever. And people were asking the question, why are these judges rubber stamping the government's violations of our charter rights and freedoms that were taking place during the lockdowns and vaccine passports? And in those court cases, the government's typically admitted, yes, our health orders do violate the freedoms of conscience, religion, expression, association, peaceful assembly. Governments admitted that in court, and these judges, most of the time, would just uphold violations of charter freedoms. And so, people say, what's up with these judges? Are they getting, thick wads of cash? Are they getting a threatening phone call from the Prime Minister? Are they getting a threatening email from the World Economic Forum? Why? What's going on? And my answer is no to all of those questions. I don't think the judges are getting bribed or threatened. But I think they were corrupted by fear. The fear that the media spread, where they portrayed COVID as much, much worse than what it really was. And the fear got into the judges. And so this book, Corrupted by Fear, exposes how these judges are writing the media narrative into their court ruling when it was not supported by evidence that was placed before the court. And what judges are supposed to do is you only rule on the basis of the evidence that's presented in court. You don't rule on the basis of what you've heard on the 6 o'clock news. But time after time, we have these court rulings which contain assertions that were not supported by the evidence that was placed before the court. The judges are writing the media narrative into their court ruling. So that's what the book is about, Corrupted by Fear. And it's not just the judges, but the media themselves, the politicians, the legal establishment, the medical establishment, everybody got very, very afraid, more afraid than what they needed to be. And so that book's available on Amazon.ca. And so far, Amazon ranks it as a best-selling Canadian book. And I've had positive feedback so far.
Wonderful.
Excellent. And it sounds like a very, very interesting read. And it leads to a question that I have, John, is do you think we have a crisis in this country over a fear, not of being wrong, but admitting you're wrong in the political world?
There's a saying that I heard that I agree with. It's very easy to fool people. It's very, very hard to persuade people that they have been fooled. Nobody wants to admit that, but at the end of the day, everybody needs to strive for the virtue of humility, to be honest with oneself, be honest with others. That is the foundation for the free society. You cannot have a functioning, thriving free society unless there's also a moral basis where people are practicing virtues like honesty, humility, courage, compassion. A virtuous society can be a thriving free society, but when virtue is lacking, it becomes very difficult, perhaps even impossible, to sustain a free society.
What's your outlook? Is there reason for Canadians to be optimistic for the future?
Well, today in 2025, there's a much stronger freedom movement in Canada than what existed in 2019 prior to lockdowns. There are a lot of Canadians who, prior to lockdowns, and we're coming up to the fifth anniversary, is going to be March the 15th. There are a lot of Canadians who, before lockdowns, never gave a moment's thought to our freedoms of peaceful assembly, travel, mobility, so on and so forth. The most they might have done politically is perhaps vote in an election, and then that's it, and completely tuned out, tuned off, not looking at laws that are being passed, not being in touch with their member of parliament or their provincial MPP or MLA. And a lot of people have woken up, and so we have a much stronger freedom movement in Canada in 2025 than what we did 5 or 6 years ago. So that's very positive. There are the threats coming down. Central bank digital currency would be an absolute nightmare, would completely turn us into serfs of the state. The government would have complete mastery and ownership of us if we ever allow for central bank digital currency. So we're releasing a paper on that in March to be proactive and educate the public. I would also not be surprised if the next assaults on our rights and freedoms are going to come in the name of saving the planet from the climate holocaust. And so we got to give up our rights and freedoms so that we don't all burn into a crisp. That kind of thing is going to be there as well. But fortunately, if people are awake and if people assume responsibility for their lives, it's very hard for a tyrant to rule over a free people. So if we educate ourselves and if we cherish our charter rights and freedoms, then it will be possible to resist tyranny in the future.
And this is one of our missions on Northern Perspective, is to encourage Canadians to get involved, stay involved, and even if the government that is the one that you voted for ends up taking power in the next election, you still have a civic duty to watch them and to hold them to account, to ensure that they're doing everything that you voted them in to do. Because as they say, when the cat's away, the mice will play. So the minute we stop paying attention to the government is when we are at the most risk of losing our freedoms. So, John, thank you very much for joining us on Northern Perspective today. Check out John's book. That we have a link to that in the description, folks. Corrupted by Fear, and links to the JCCF website as well as their X profile are in our description as well. And we look forward to the coming decision.
Thanks for having me on your show. It's a real honor to be with you and with your viewers and listeners.